Major breaking news out of the United States Supreme Court. This is not specific to the Second Amendment, but it involves a lot of players that we're familiar with, specifically the Joe Biden Department of Justice with the Solicitor General Elizabeth Proligar, who's the lawyer who you've seen argue repeatedly in favor of the ATF, has just lost big time in a huge election fight against the state of Virginia. Specifically, Governor Glenn Youngkin of the state of Virginia was in the process of removing over 1,600 non-American citizens from being able to vote this fall in this upcoming election. The lower courts, the federal district court, as well as the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals, stopped Glenn Youngkin with an injunction and told the state of Virginia to put those 1,600 non-Americans back on the voting rolls so they can vote if they need to. It's effectively what they were doing by putting them back on the rolls. And guess what just happened today? The United States Supreme Court has entered a stay that now stops that federal court injunction against Glenn Youngkin from taking effect. A major loss for the Biden Department of Justice that was working alongside other parties to try to reinstate these non-citizen voters from being able to vote in the Virginia election. So big win here for election integrity. And now I should note the legal arguments, because we make you the smartest person in the room for a reason. The argument was brought by the lawyers on behalf of the 1,600 people, claiming that by allowing the state of Virginia to purge the voting rolls within 90 days of a federal election violated a federal statute referring to a kind of a national quiet period, which says that you're not allowed to be removing voting rolls or purging rolls or purging voters from rolls in the 90 days before an election, because this violates the National Voter Registration Act. And they said that Glenn Youngkin and the governor of Virginia and the state of Virginia waited too long to engage in this purge. Governor Youngkin and the state of Virginia argued that no, they were just going through the normal process. They had already complied with the law. They had issued this order that this was going to occur before the 90-day period, meaning before 90 days before this election. And they said they're just going through the ongoing process of cleanup by checking and cross-checking records. And if they find a non-American citizen registered to vote, they're taking that person off the list because they're not allowed to vote. The Department of Justice sued the state of Virginia, claiming this was illegal and violated federal law. And I'm happy to report the Supreme Court has rejected this argument by the Biden administration to reinstall these individuals back on the voting rolls. Let me just give you a sense of the argument made by the state of Virginia in their favor, explaining why the Department of Justice under Joe Biden, the Solicitor General Elizabeth Proligar, the lawyer for the Biden administration in this case, again, who you're quite familiar with. I played a lot of videos and clips from her in other Second Amendment and gun-related litigations in the past on this channel. You're quite familiar. And by the way, another reason why we don't want Kamala Harris to be president is if she is, then Elizabeth Proligar will likely be the next Supreme Court justice replacing Clarence Thomas or Sam Alito, and that would be a catastrophe if you care about your right to keep and bear arms and if you care about checking the power and authority of the ATF. So with that said, let's see what the argument was in favor of allowing Governor Youngkin to clean up these rolls and obviously remove those people who are not American citizens from being able to vote in this election in the state of Virginia. The state of Virginia argued, quote, less than 2 weeks before the 2024 presidential election and more than a month into early voting, the federal district court below ordered applicants, Virginia, and its election officials to place over 1,600 self-identified non-citizens back onto Virginia's voting rolls in violation of Virginia law and common sense. About 600 of these individuals personally informed the Virginia Department of Motor Vehicles, the DMV, that they are not citizens, and about 1,000 presented non-citizen residency documents to DMV and were then positively identified as non-citizens through the United States' own, that's the federal government's own, systematic alien verification for entitlements database. The United States itself has explained that SAVE, that's the database, accurately reports the applicant status 99% of the time. And that is what Virginia was relying upon. The federal district court based the injunction, which mandates a variety of disruptive measures in addition to forcing non-citizens back on the ballot, on the provision of the National Voting Registration Act, the National Voter Registration Act, that does not even apply to the removal of non-citizens and other voter registrations that are void ab initio. And even if it did apply to the removal of non-citizens, Virginia's program complied with it anyway. The election eve injunction is thus based on legal error. The injunction, which prohibits the application of a law that has been on the books since the Department of Justice pre-cleared it in 2006, will also irreparably injure Virginia's sovereignty, confuse her voters, overload her election machinery and administrators, and likely lead non-citizens to think they are permitted to vote. A criminal offense that will cancel the franchise of eligible voters. So that was a powerful brief submitted by the lawyers on behalf of the state of Virginia against Elizabeth Proligar, against the Department of Justice, against the Biden administration and others that were fighting over whether or not Virginia had the legal authority to purge these voter rolls of these individuals. This is just another reminder of how important this election is. The three justices that are the lefties, Justice Sotomayor, Justice Kagan, and Justice Brown Jackson, would have allowed the injunction to remain in place, which means that the state of Virginia would have been required to put back on their voting rolls the non-citizens. Do you hear what I just said? This was a 6-3 decision by the Supreme Court. The three liberals would have required, hear what I just said? Required the state of Virginia to put back on the voting rolls these 1,600 non-American citizens. Think about that for a second. How crazy is that? And again, for those of you who don't appreciate, or maybe you have criticism of Donald Trump, remember, we're hiring Donald Trump for a job, and it's a dirty job. You may not like Donald Trump. It's a nasty job and a difficult job with a lot of issues and a lot of people fighting you. And I think we need a fighter. Here's another example of it. We have a situation where literally the federal government is siding to force a state to put non-Americans back on the voting rolls, theoretically, so that somebody could vote for them. Remember, they don't have to vote for themselves. Somebody could vote for them. We might not be able to catch it. And that's why it's so important for these voting rolls to be clean and correct. Nevertheless, that is where we are today. So anyone who thinks this election is not hugely important when it comes to our justices and who are the federal judges, this is a great example of how even outside of the specific Second Amendment context, justices elected, or I should say selected the Supreme Court by elected officials are hugely important to protecting our constitutional system of government. Because if we start allowing non-Americans to have the franchise, to be able to vote, or even to appear on voting poll rolls, because remember, it doesn't matter if they vote. If they're on the voting rolls, someone could vote for them. So one of the ways to prevent that crime from being committed, as you know, the best crime is the crime that never occurs. It's the crime that's stopped. So when someone comes into your house to rob you, rather than get into a situation where you have to thwart the robbery, it's much better for them to walk past your house because they think it's too fortified, too hard to get in. Right? You want to thwart the tort, you want to thwart the crime, you want to thwart the bad thing from occurring before it ever occurs. And that's one of the great benefits of carrying guns, because people don't know who has a gun and who doesn't, and they're not sure who they can rob and who they can't, and thus they don't rob. Likewise, if you remove people, dead people, non-Americans, people that are just simply not eligible to vote for whatever the legal reason, if you remove their names from the voting rolls, you prevent other people who may have bad intentions from being able to vote on those people's behalf, which is not only good and important for the American system of justice, because if non-eligible voters are voting, they're disenfranchising people that are eligible to vote, right? If somebody who's not supposed to vote votes, they're taking away your vote because they're canceling your vote. And, of course, it's good for the people that aren't eligible to vote, because the last thing they want is to be accused of voting illegally when they didn't vote. So why put that burden on them as well? So as far as I'm concerned, removing dead people, removing people that aren't eligible to vote, and certainly removing non-Americans from the voting rolls is a no-brainer. And the fact that this Biden administration tried to use a federal statute to stop the ordinary cleanup of the voting rolls of these non-Americans is really shocking. But that's what we're up against. And this is what will happen for another 4 years if Kamala Harris wins this election. We will face these same Department of Justice officials, the same Department of Justice, these same lawyers for another 4+ years. And I don't know how the America can survive as America if we have another 4 years of this. But again, the history of the future has yet to be written, as I like to say. So there you have it, folks. Breaking news. Hope you enjoyed this 4 Boxes Diner edition. Make sure you subscribe to this channel and like this video. Don't forget to follow me on X at 4 Boxes Diner, and we'll see you again very soon here at the 4 Boxes Diner.
Orders up. Table 2A.